Welcome to one of my videos where I show you the best tips and tricks to building your MTG Arena account. One thing I want to note is that these videos are strictly for people, for the most part, who are looking to play constructed on Arena. There's definitely a lot more value into playing limited. However, that's not something that everybody wants to do. Limited is a tough environment, but it also teaches you how to play Magic better. If you would like me to build a video showing you the best ways to get value out of playing limited, let me know in the comments below. There are a lot of good videos out there on YouTube. MTG Nerd Girl has good ones. Nox also has some as well. But if you would like to see me make one, please let me know, and I'll definitely help out with that. But like I said, these videos are pretty much geared towards people who are going to be playing constructed formats because they want to build towards a certain type of deck. With that, let's jump into today's lesson. In this section, I'm going to cover probably the most important aspect to building a budget or free-to-play arena account there is, talking about actually how to construct decks. So this is going to cover a lot of different topics, a lot of different things, so let's jump in. So the first thing we're going to look towards is the fact that if you're playing Arena on a budget, you're probably going to be looking at building monocolor decks. The reason for that is most of your good dual lands are going to be rares, and you really don't want to contribute, especially if you have a limited amount of rares and mythics you're going to get, towards playing a multicolor deck. You're going to be putting your rares towards lands, which, while making it easier to cast spells, they don't actually make your deck better in a sense of winning games. If you stick towards a monocolor deck, you're also going to get what I consider to be the most important thing when it comes to Magic, and it's consistency. If you play a monocolor deck, you're going to be playing a bunch of cards that do a similar effect because you're going to be sticking to what that color is trying to do, and you're going to get a more consistent ratio, and therefore you're going to get more of a win rate because your deck's going to be doing the same thing. That being said, dual color decks and tricolor and so on and so forth, they're typically more powerful decks, sure. There will be exceptions. Sometimes monocolor decks actually are just the best decks to be playing for the reasons I'm talking about here. But with those kind of decks, you're investing somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 12, possibly even 16 or more of your rares and mythics just to make the mana work. And that is why I definitely recommend you steer towards these monocolor decks when building a free-to-play or budget arena account. Continuing into colors a little bit, I wanted to talk about one key thing here. Unless you just really like blue, I recommend you build decks that are white, black, red, or green, mostly because all of those decks, or all of those colors, have good removal spells. White's going to have removal, black's going to have removal, red's going to have damage spells, they're not going to have strictly removal spells. Green's going to have a lot of cards that make your creatures fight other creatures, which counts as removal, basically in the same way that red spells are removal. Blue, what it usually offers is bounce spells and counter spells. Bounce spells put your opponent's card back in their hand, and they're just going to recast it later. Counter spells require you to be reactive, so basically you're taking turns off of playing a creature to put pressure on your opponent. Blue is a very good color. A lot of people argue that they hate blue, it's the worst thing, they hate having their spells get countered and all this kind of stuff. Blue is a very powerful color. However, if you're building a monocolor deck, it's really not the best way to play, because what you're going to be doing is holding back these creatures you could be casting to put lethal on your opponent, and instead you're going to be holding up these counter spells, and if your opponent doesn't play anything that needs to be countered, you just wasted an entire turn you could have been contributing to that. Whereas if you're playing a color like black, for example, you're gonna deploy your threats every single turn. But when your opponent plays that card that needs to be answered, you play the removal spell on it. That way, you deal with the threat, but you deal with it that way because the card will go to the graveyard, and unless it has some way of coming out of the graveyard, they're not getting it back, unlike a card like Unsummon, for example, whereas you bounce your opponent's creature and then you just recast it the next turn. The only time mono blue decks are really good is when you have a card like Curious Obsession in the format, whereas you just put it on a 1-mana creature and then you start attacking with it and it generates value, giving you extra counter spells to make sure your opponent never casts anything. Or when there's a lot of good flash creatures, so that basically you hold up your counter spells. If your opponent doesn't play anything that needs to be countered, then you flash in a creature. That's really the only time a mono blue deck is good, is in those two situations. Right now, there is that. However, most of the creatures with flash that are good are rares and mythics. That is why I recommend steering away towards mono blue if you're looking at building a budget deck. That being said, if blue is your style, go for it. It's going to take some commitment. It's probably going to take more rares and mythics to make the deck really good. But if you're not having fun with Magic, why are you even playing? With that, we're going to move into our next section of building our deck. I'm going to select standard because it's generally what most people play, especially early on for his budget. This is going to be where you're going to get your best chance at getting wins. The first thing I recommend looking at when it comes to building decks is paying attention to rotations. If you're unsure when a rotation is going to be, hit me up in the comments below and I'll let you know when the next rotation, or if there's a rotation coming up soon you need to be worried about. Or ask someone close to you who you trust would know information like this, or you could just look it up yourself. But if you're unsure, I recommend counseling somebody who knows when this kind of stuff happens first. At the time I'm explaining this, the rotation is actually coming up soon. There's going to be one in a few months. What we're going to have is, so right now our standard is everything from Eldraine to Strixhaven. We're going to have a rotation that's going to have a cutoff right here. So the only sets that are going to be staying in standard are Zendikar, Kaldheim, and Strixhaven. So if you're building a budget deck, if you have the cards from the Core Set 21, Ikoria, Theros, and Eldraine, put them in your deck. They're good. If they're good cards, put them in your deck. You need to take advantage of what's going to be in standard at the time. That way you have the best chance of winning. That being said, I would not craft cards from these sets unless they just really were going to change how my deck was winning. And I definitely wouldn't buy any of these packs. The only thing I would do is possibly craft cards from these sets. And that's if the card would drastically change my win rate. Strixhaven, Kaldheim, Zendikar, this is where you're going to want to stay. This is where you're going to want to craft all your cards. You're going to want to pick out whichever set has the most commons and uncommons that you need. And those are the packs you're going to need to buy. Okay, beyond this, what you're going to want to do at the first step of the building process, it's going to look a little bit different on my account, but for the most part you're going to want to follow this process. So what you're going to want to do is click the three sets, especially in the case like I'm talking about right now, the three sets that aren't rotating. If you don't have a rotation coming soon, you don't even have to click this. Just let all the cards that are going to be in standard. If you want to, because sometimes you'll have card, from a different set or whatever. Like say for example, a card was in Dominaria, but it got reprinted in one of these sets. It's going to show both copies. So for a visual aspect, you might want to click all the sets that are in standard, so that it only shows you this version of the card, so that you're not confused why it's in standard. But for right now, we're just going to focus on these three sets. You're going to want to click not collected, and then click Uncommon and Common so that it shows you only the commons and uncommons that you could potentially play, and it only shows you the sets that you're specifically looking at. And also you click the not collected part so that you see cards that you could craft that maybe would help your deck. So now it's just going to pop up this. So if you need help, I can make videos showing what are good cards to craft in standard at the time, or you can try to use your best mindset to evaluate whether a card's playable or not, or ask somebody you trust to help you. But what you're going to want to do is go through and find every playable card that's a common or uncommon. And you may not have play sets of these, but just click and add them to the deck anyway. Okay, so I decided to, and if you're looking to build a specific color deck, what you'll do is click the color that represents what you're trying to do. So what I did is took all the cards I felt were really good that fit the descriptions that we had clicked on earlier. And so what you're going to do is at this point you're going to see what you don't have collected. You're going to check your uncommons and commons, see if you can spend stuff towards it. And these are the cards you're going to want to look at crafting at the moment you're building your deck and long term. So what you'll want to do is compare cards that are the same type. So for example, to me, these are all all 1 mana 1 drops. It's just a matter of which one's going to be better for my deck. So I'm going to look at these specifically and see Hall Monitor is a 1/1 with haste that can make it to where another creature can't block this turn. So that's going to help me push towards damage. Plus it's a creature that's going to swing the turn it comes into play, assuming my opponent does not have anything interfering with that. Fireblade Charger is a 1 mana 1/1. Whenever it dies, it deals damage to its power to any target, which is really important because if you're able to make this creature bigger somehow, it'll end up doing more damage whenever it dies. And a Comb Hellhound is a 1 mana 0/1. However, whenever a land enters the battlefield, it gets +2/+2 until the end of the turn. So you could potentially make this a 1 mana 2/3. This card does require you to play a land every single turn, which is why I would probably rate it to be the worst of these three. However, if you're looking at filling out this deck, it's a perfectly fine card. So that's how you want to do this. And then you want to try to get as many cards that fit that description as possible. So if you didn't have enough of these, you would probably want to play these. You might even play a card like this, for example, just to fill out the spot. This was the next best 1 drop I found. And just continue that way until you finish your deck. But I would recommend crafting the cards that you would evaluate as being good, or somebody you know evaluating as being good. The next thing in red is you have removal spells. So these are the best removal spells I found. And a card like this, Tormentor's Helm, is just a extra way to push damage. If it's blocked, it's going to deal damage to your opponent anyway. If they don't block, it makes your creature bigger, and it's a pretty cheap equipment spell, so it's a good way to get some extra damage in. So once you're finished with that, let's say these are all cards you wanted, but let's say you don't have them all. The next thing I recommend you do is separate these cards individually by the set they come from. So we're going to move these over here, move this into Kaldheim, Zendikar. So the next thing you want to look at, and let's say I had 0 of these cards. Let's say I had none of them. I didn't have a single copy of any of these. What I would look at is the cards that you need the most from a set. That's the set I would be buying packs from. So if I were trying to build this deck, I would see that I have 4 play sets of cards that I need from Zendikar. Kaldheim is kind of close. So if you didn't value a Comb Hellhound, for example, you could take that out. And then you would basically be able to choose between Kaldheim and Zendikar which one you thought was best. Those are the ones I would buy. I would set myself to where this is the one I want to buy these packs from. And then I would not craft a single card from the sets that I'm buying packs from unless it was a card that was going to drastically change how good my deck is. So let's say, for example, we commit and we're going to buy Zendikar packs. I would then move over and just craft the cards from these two sets right here, and that would give me the best chance towards finishing my deck out. And basically what I would do is just decide which one of these I don't have a card that has a similar effect, or cards that I could basically play a different card instead, and then I would buy the ones you need. So for example, if you don't have anything that's going to replace a card like Tormentor's Helm, you would want to craft these. If you don't have another removal spell you could use, you would want to craft your removal spells. Same thing with these with the 1-drops. There's not really any good closers in these, but at least this will give you a base for the last step of this process. And if you follow this, it'll give you enough solid cards to build a good deck. So we're starting over, and the next part of the process is doing what's going to give you the best value for your rares and mythics. So one thing I like to do, especially when it comes to crafting rares and mythics, is find cards that are going to overlap in other colors. So for example, if you're building budget decks and you're building monocolor decks, if there are colorless cards that are very good, it will actually fit into any of your decks. Same thing with gold cards. It may not fit into any monocolor deck, but it will fit into one of those two. So to go with this example, one thing I'm going to do is show you 2 cards that fit those descriptions. I'll show 3. I've got 3 in mind. So the first thing I want to show is Lurrus. Lurrus is a white-black, so you can play it in either of those color decks. It's a companion, which you could just craft 1 copy, and as long as you fit the companion restrictions, you'll be able to use it in that deck as a free card to have. Also, a card like Lurrus is just good by itself. So let's say you didn't meet the deck building requirements to keep it as your companion, you could still put it in your deck, and it could offer the same value basically as if it was your companion. And it also fits into multiple colors, so you could craft this and it would go in either of your white or black deck. Another card I like is Blade Historian. This is a card that does restrict to make sure that you're able to play it on turn 4, but it's a good closing card. And the cool thing is, you can build a white deck or a red deck to put this card in, and it'll help you finish out games, and it'll give you more value for your rares. So let's just take the standard that we have currently. If you're building a white deck, it's actually just good in that deck in general. But if you're building the red deck, for example, Embercleave is a much better card, and Torbrand. These are 2 cards that are way better than Blade Historian. However, those 2 cards only fit into the mono red deck, whereas this helps you build 2 different decks. So that's why I like cards like this when you're building on a budget, because it helps you with multiple things. Also to note with the example I just gave you, this card does not rotate. Embercleave and Torbrand are both from Throne of Eldraine, and they'll rotate soon. So that's another reason why this card is just better to craft right now. The last card I'm going to show is the best. Let's spell things correctly. The best rare to craft, period. There's another card, and it also doesn't rotate. So in fact, I'm just going to pull up Colorless Lands. But the best cards to craft are cards like Crawling Barrens, and I'm going to specifically talk about Faceless Haven because it's the best one to do. However, you could also do Crawling Barrens. Neither one of these cards rotate, so they're both really good. I wouldn't play too many of them if you're playing a monocolor deck, especially if you played a card like Blade Historian that requires you to play all the cards or all your mana be a specific color. That being said, their lands that contribute towards any color deck. So you could play any of the 5 color decks, slap enough snow lands in there so that you can make this a creature, and it's a good way to get a threat out of your land, which is why I love Faceless Haven. It is by far the best rare to craft in budget decks right now, and it's gonna get played in finished versions of decks. It's just extremely good. Another card I can show you, though I wouldn't recommend crafting this one because it's rotating. Okay, I gotta click off land. Is cards like this. So Stonecoil Serpent is a X creature. It has reach and trample. Most importantly, it's colorless, and it gets counters equal to however much mana you spent into it. So if you play it as a 1 mana creature, it's a 1/1. If you play it as a 5 mana creature, it'll enter with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. So while I don't recommend crafting this right now, it is the type of card I recommend crafting because it could fit into any of the decks, and this used to be, before rotation was coming up, one of the cards I recommended everybody crafting because it is a card that'll slot into any color, and also in this card's specific case, it is good early turns of the game because it gives you a creature to play. Let's say it's your only card you can cast turn 1. It gives you a threat. Or if you draw this later in the game and you have like 6, 7, 8 mana, you can make a massive threat with this card. So that's why this is a card I used to highly evaluate. It's still really good. However, if you're playing on a budget, I don't recommend crafting it just because it's going to rotate out soon. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do after you've crafted all these cards, after you've bought packs to try to get some of the commons and uncommons you need, after you find the best rares and mythics to craft that are, you know, in the colors you're looking to play, for example, the next thing you want to do is go through and only look at the cards you've collected at this point. So basically just make sure you're in the sets that are legal for whatever format. You really don't even have to click on anything, and what you're going to do is just go through and add every playable card, and then what you want to do is diversify the type of cards you want to play. So if you're playing mono red, for example, you want a lot of 1 and 2 drop creatures, you want a decent amount of removal spells, and then you want some cards that are going to close the game, like Blade Historian, for example. And then you're going to want to go through and find the best cards in each one of those. And if you have somebody to help you, I highly recommend doing that, especially if you're new to the game and unsure what a good card is. And then just go from there and start making cuts. And you want to get a good balance of the 3. And like I said, if you're playing a white deck, you're going to want most of your cards, or a red deck, for example, you're going to want most of your cards to be on the lower end, and then have the removal spells and the higher end cards be your lower piles. And you pretty much want to do that for anything, especially with an aggro deck. And then what you do is just make cuts and make cuts and make cuts. You're going to want to play somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 23, maybe 24 lands, depending on the deck, and depending on if you have any cards like Faceless Haven, for example. And just continue to make cuts that way until you get to 60 cards. And you always want to play 60 with certain exceptions because you want the best chance at consistency of your deck. This is why you practically in every single event, you're gonna see people playing 60 card decks because they want the best chance at drawing their best cards. And the only way to do that is to minimize the number of cards you have. So try to avoid playing these 65 and 70 card decks. After that, you've got your deck finished. Go play, go have fun. If you start to see maybe you misevaluated a card or something like that, or you get a better card, change your deck. Have fun with it. Again, that's the most important part of this, especially if you're playing on a budget. Your goals shouldn't be to say that, oh, I'm going to win 100% of my games because I'm that good. Typically a budget deck is going to struggle against somebody who has finished the decks, but you've got to see it through a different light. If you're playing a deck that you basically played for free, and your opponent is playing a deck with like 20, 30 mythics or rares or whatever, and you win that one game against them, you did something they couldn't. You won with a very cheap, mostly commons and uncommons deck, whereas theirs was all these massive things and probably had to contribute some money towards. And that's the best thing about playing on a budget, is you're testing yourself. You're limiting your resources and seeing what you can do with less than what your opponent has. With that, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and hope you come back to check out the next video. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support the channel, there's several things you can do, and most importantly, and especially if you enjoyed this video, all of them are budget friendly. The most important thing you can do to help me out is to subscribe to this YouTube channel, as well as go towards my Twitch and follow me on there. Same thing with my Twitter, if you have that. Another thing you could do is to like this video. It'll get it circulating to where more people will see it. And next thing you could do is just continue to share videos you think that people need to see. And specifically with these, you may not be a budget player, or it may not specifically affect you, but you may know somebody who is playing Arena and playing on a budget and would need to get some tips like these. Or maybe you've got a new player you would like to introduce, and once you've gotten them started, a video like this will help make sure they're putting their resources in the right direction. Next thing you could do is just watch some of my other videos. I put out a lot of deck tech videos, teaching things about Magic, a lot of discussion, especially on Twitch, where I do that live. You can come see me there, and just share other videos and continue to watch things as much as possible. So like I said, views, likes, and the subscriptions all help me out, and most importantly, they are all free. I'm not asking for anything specific, just that. With that, I hope you enjoy my videos, and thank you very much just for making it to the end of this video.